goodness, I'm so excited. Keron, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I know I say that every single time I do a podcast, but I genuinely mean it every time I say it. But this one, I feel like I'm going to learn about something that I don't know anything about. So I love that.
Well, I hope I can be of help to both you and your audience.
Oh, I love that. So the first question that I ask every single guest on this podcast is, how do you refer to your disability?
So I am disabled. I use that
Mm-hmm.
word very, very proudly. I have cerebral palsy. So yeah, I use the word disabled,
Mm-hmm.
and I think my journey to using that word has taken a while,
Yeah.
but it's an interesting word for me in terms of how I've had to unlearn a lot of ableist narratives, and
Yeah.
that is ultimately why I'm in the line of work that I'm in, because I think narratives are so pervasive within our
Mm-hmm.
culture, how we speak about disability.
I love what you said about how using the word disabled proudly has been a journey for you, because I think everybody goes on that journey. And actually I'm going to go a bit further and say that I know that everybody does, because I've had enough of these conversations to know that because of the way that the social sphere works and society, we all find the word disabled quite difficult in the beginning because it's seen as this negative bad thing. But actually, when you can reclaim it and take power over it, it becomes the best thing in the world. So I really appreciate that you said that you also had a journey to go on to use that word. And I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about that journey. How did it start, really?
I think we are told that somehow disability is bad, and disability is unusual, and disability is not a normal part of the human experience.
Yeah.
For me, in my line of work, and that's why I will keep coming back to this, the kind of exclusion of disabled people
Yeah.
within film and TV, and kind of more cultural elements of our society generally, that exclusion perpetuates this idea that disabled people are other, disabled people are a very small minority that we can afford to ignore, and doesn't actually reflect the reality of the society we live in. Disabled people make up the biggest minority group of like, and everyone will become disabled. The inevitability of disability within the human experience is such that each and every one of us should care about bad disability representation, because if you're not affected by it already, you sure will be when you become disabled. So that is ultimately why I kind of how I've gone from learning about the pervasiveness of bad disability representation and how that attaches itself to the word disabled and how we think about that word disabled. And the more I learned, the more I was like, oh no, I'm very proudly disabled. And
Yeah.
I'm very proud to kind of start to disentangle some of these narratives around disability, and hopefully start to create a different narrative that's more inclusive and actually more realistic.
Yeah. I love that, because you're so right about the narrative of disability, because if and when, so, and what I mean by this is, when you're born disabled or acquire a disability at a very young age, you are almost told that disability is not the normal part of the human experience, and that you are the odd one out, and that you're going to be the one that sits at the back of the classroom, or you're going to be the person that has support, and it's not going to be the normal. You're going to be the only one. That's for you to deal with. But by the way, there's no representation of that, so it all looks doom and gloom. And that's factual, because I know a lot of people who've had that experience. I myself have had that experience. So what you said about narrative being so persuasive and pervasive when it comes to disability representation is so key. Because when I think back to my childhood, there was nobody that looked like me on TV or in films. There was nobody like me who was on the radio. There was nobody like me on social media. Social media didn't really exist, but the narrative and wanting to show disability representation in the right light, and I'm not going to say positive light, because I think there's a big difference between representing something positively and representing something authentically. And there's also this big issue between, and I'm sure you're very aware of this, as I know you will be, is that there's a big barrier, maybe the right word, I'm not too sure, when it comes to disability representation and the idea of being so heavily inspirational just for going about your day to day. So, like, for example, it is not inspirational for a wheelchair user to be sat in the pub. That is not inspirational, because they're just an adult going to the pub, which is what everybody else does. But the media traditionally has loved to play that up and been like, oh my goodness, they're amazing. Oh my goodness, they have friends. Like, who knew that could happen? They're just a human being having their experience, which is completely different to what average Joe Blogs is. And I love that you're kind of reclaiming that and taking part of this almost revolution when it comes to TV and the media industry. And I think that's so interesting and exciting.
It's interesting that you talk about inspiration, because inspiration porn, which is what
Yeah.
it's called in the kind of representation world, for me is just as destructive,
Yeah.
in some ways even more destructive than other outright ableist negative representations of disabled people. And the reason why I say it's sometimes even more is because people think they're doing the right thing,
Yeah.
and then when you go to correct those inspirational narratives, you're somehow, as the disabled person, you're somehow the bad guy because they think they're doing the right thing. And then suddenly they're being corrected. And naturally, I assume people get defensive because they want to do. I don't think people want to do it wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
when you then correct what they think is the right thing, like I said, somehow you're then the bad guy. It's like, no, we just need to move beyond this kind of simplistic, yeah, not even really thought about inspirational narrative. It's just they're kind of superhuman, which I hate with a passion.
Yeah.
And the reason why I hate superhuman is because I think it's overcorrecting a representation that we all agree is bad, which is a kind of where if you go right back to the start of disability representation, the kind of subhuman, the kind of lesser human representation of
Yeah.
disabled people, and somehow we've overcorrected to superhuman, which
Mm-hmm.
is again not right. Why can't disabled people just be human? We are neither
Yeah.
subhuman nor superhuman. We are just human. But I think the reason why that happens is because disabled people represent um something that humans generally don't like to acknowledge, which is the vulnerability of the human. We
Yeah.
literally are a physical representation that humans have, aren't necessarily the kind of, yeah, like a superhero, or we have vulnerabilities that we can't always control. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's why it happens to disabled people, because we're kind of quite human centric in our kind of approach to the world. And
Yeah.
disabled people are like, life isn't quite that simple. And so I think that's why I think that's why the representation of disabled people is not always human, because there's lots of kind of different narratives that we need to actively engage in before we try to correct.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said about superhuman as well, because to be superhuman still implies some element of mutation away from what is like what I refer to consistently as average Joe blogs. And that's still, and you're so right, we've overcompensated for being like, oh, look at the poor disabled people, whereas now it's like, oh my god, superhuman. And at some point and at some level that still implies some form of mutation away from average Joe blogs, when actually we're still the same. Things just work a bit differently. We're maybe wired a bit differently, or we're missing, actually no, we're not missing anything because we're freaking perfect the way we are, but there are parts of our body that might not exist, and that is just how it is. There's nothing superhuman about that, but there's also, yes, it comes with its struggles, but there's nothing that's inherently bad about that as a disability.
It's not that I'm arguing with what you just said, but I'm gonna question things you just said.
No, I love that because it's good to have debate.
You just said that we're perfect as we are, or that we're all perfect as we are. I think that's slightly questionable because I don't think any human is perfect, and we've all got physical flaws, and we all have our own physical challenges that we all need to overcome. So this idea of the perfect human doesn't exist. There is no perfect. There is no kind of. And if we're trying to set up this idea of the perfect human, then A, we're all going to fail. So we're setting ourselves up for failure. And B, like, who is the judge of what is perfect and what isn't?
I am the judge. I am God. I am joking. I'm not that egotistical. I think what I mean by like the perfect human is that like all of our souls, whether you believe in a soul or not, is that like your soul is perfect and complete as it is, and we're just in this like physical representation. But actually I do completely agree with your point in the idea that we can set ourselves up for failure if we have like a perfect image in our brain that we want to attain to. So I will agree with you on that. So interestingly, before we get into what you do, I was wondering, as a disabled man, what was childhood like for you?
Childhood. So I've got an amazing family, which is, I'm the older I get, the more I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was born to two non-disabled parents, so naturally, they are discovering disability, kind of alongside my experience as well.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because obviously they've grown up in a kind of world of disability narratives that I now can start to deconstruct. So it's amazing. My parents are amazing. But I guess we all have to kind of start to unpick what we were taught as we were younger. What I'm basically trying to say is life is kind of, when you're younger, you can't necessarily articulate it, although I've always, hopefully, touch wood, been able to articulate myself. When you're younger, you have to rely on your parents to articulate your needs a bit more, and that's more difficult when they themselves have grown up in an ableist society. That's what I'm trying to say. That's not a critique of my parents. That's just a critique of just naturally
general society.
You're gonna, when you've got two non-disabled parents who have very little experience with disabled people before me, and I'm 5 years old and I'm trying to tell a doctor that I don't want that, and that then it's down to them to try and articulate why. So that was kind of my approach to my family. And obviously I went to a kind of a quote unquote mainstream school. I was the first disabled person to go to my primary school. And that obviously brought with its challenges, but I think it went as well as it could have. But obviously, naturally, there's going to be things that I look back now as an adult and go, I don't think that was right, or why was I doing that? Why was I made to do dance class? Why was I? And you like, was that inclusion for the sake of inclusion? Well, actually,
Yes.
the intent wasn't necessarily the effect.
This. If I could snip anything of what you just said about the intent and the effect is so key, because I think as people who were born disabled or became disabled or acquired their disability young, there's schools, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, schools do not know how to handle disabled children, full stop. You're either wrapped in cotton wool and you're not allowed to do anything, or you're a health and safety hazard, so you're not allowed to do anything. Or the other alternative is that they fling you into absolutely everything to just say that they've included you, which in and of itself is also problematic.
Yeah, and also the departments who deal with disabled people are called the Special Educational Needs Department. Apologies, but why are disabled people's needs special?
Yeah, because they're just human needs.
Like, what's special about the fact that basically it should be called the Accessibility Department, which is everybody has access needs, not just disabled people. Everybody has access needs. If the classroom has no lights and nobody can see because it's pitch black, regardless of whether you're disabled or not, that is an access need.
Yeah.
So it's like, come on, let's start to, we could do a whole podcast on the education system and the many flaws of the education system. We can talk about GCSEs and what a nightmare that was for me. A levels and university I've just finished. Woohoo! Thank the Lord for that. But throughout the education system, it's not designed for disabled people. It's badly retrofitted to kind of just pass the kind of basic. Oh, we've included them.
Yeah, literally that. It's very, needs are almost met at base level. Needs are not met where they should be. They're met right at the lower limit of what your needs could be. And you're right, everybody has access needs. It doesn't matter that there's disability involved, because absolutely everybody does have access needs, and we really need to rejig and rethink about the scholastic system and actually just institutions in general. But again, like you said, we could have a whole different podcast on this topic because there's so much to be said about it. So this is where we get to the interesting part, and I genuinely can't wait to listen to this, because I know what you do. Some people who have found this podcast will have seen what you do. And so talk to me about, firstly, how has your disability, it may or may not have, but I'm pretty certain it probably has, particularly because we spoke about narratives. How has your disability impacted your career and what you've chosen to go into?
So, I'm an actor, and I started, very fortunately for me, I started in the summer of 2020. Now, why was that important? That was important because everything at that point was online.
Yeah.
And what does that do? That makes it a hell of a lot more accessible to disabled people.
Yeah.
And self-taping and Zoom auditions changed everything for our industry.
Yeah.
And it's not going anywhere. We will be zooming, or whatever the equivalent of zooming is in the future, and we will be taping forever.
Yeah.
So for me, I was able to start because I was able to access the actual auditions. Because if I had to go, I mean, I don't know what it was like historically, but beforehand, I didn't even consider it as a possibility, because you don't know. There's so many different ramifications of accessibility. You don't know whether the building is going to be accessible. You don't know if the room within the building is going to be accessible. There's so many. I could go on and on and on, and I won't bore you with, because I'm sure all your audience will be fully aware of different accessibility considerations.
Yeah.
And so that's why I kind of just didn't think there was even a possibility for someone like me. But then I started online, got my first job, and then
Woohoo!
got another job, and then got another job, and then it kind of kept going to where I am now. And 3 years later, where we're just in a slightly different period for our industry, but that's not disability related per se. But it's kind of it is disability related in terms of a lot of what's being argued about with like the actors strike kind of is about accessibility. It is about timings and having enough time to do the audition. And there is definitely a disability element, although it's not being called that, which is that we can have another conversation about why people don't label access needs as access needs unless they apply to disabled people, which I always find a bit weird. But yeah, so that's kind of where I started, and then I've kind of got more and more experience, and I do more and more talks on disability representation because that is ultimately why I went into acting in the first place. Is because I think film and TV offers a platform to not just educate but really open up disabled lives to a much wider audience, and kind of really you get to really illustrate the challenges we face in a way that an audience can understand um and feel safe as well. Because I think film and TV gives people that kind of window, but ultimately they can put pause and come back to it. Whereas if I was going to do a talk to 100 people at disability, they may feel uncomfortable because I'm challenging their ideas, or you know what I mean. So I think both are important, and platforms like yours on this podcast are vitally important as well. Because we need disabled discourse discussed in many different forums.
Firstly, thank you for saying that about my podcast. I love my baby. That's how I view it. I think it's important, and that's why I do it. Sometimes I think it's utter rubbish, but that's because I am known to chat shit.
but also, that is important as well. Disabled people should be able to I will let
chat
you
shit.
yes I will let you classify however you want to classify your language. But that's important as well. Disabled people shouldn't just be able to only talk when we have a really pressing, articulate point to say. We should be able to waffle like everyone else.
I honestly think that what you said about almost giving a speech to a room full of people about disability and then being able to see a disability narrative on TV, it's actually given me a really interesting way of thinking about this, because I think you're absolutely right. I think if you can see disability on TV and it being represented, and we're talking like series, films, whatever, one-off episodes, it does give a completely different glimpse into the world of disability than if you're right, if you're to stand in front of a room of 100 people to then talk about the disabled experience. Because you're right, in that room of 100 people, you could be making people feel uncomfortable, rightly or wrongly. It's not for you to say whether you're making people feel uncomfortable, and it's also not your responsibility if they are. But actually both completely serve a purpose, in that one is about viewing the disabled experience and understanding it on a bit more of an informal level, but still having that inside knowledge, and also it being told very authentically. Whereas having delivering a speech or delivering a keynote speech to like 100 people in the room, you could resonate with maybe 5 or 6, but actually the rest of it is going to be a bit different, because if you have ever been booked to speak, that at some point you have to either deliver like a shock value or like a piece of information that is going to make the crowd feel a certain way. That's what speeches are. They're emotive. And actually, both, you're completely right, both have their own separate needs, time and space. But for you wanting to go into changing narratives through acting and having that discourse being told in an authentic way, I think is really important, because you're right. As disabled people, we should be allowed to just chat rubbish, and we don't always just have to have really articulate things to say, because I think a lot of people expect us to have really articulate things to say, and sometimes, actually, like 9 times out of 10, what I say is rubbish. But actually, I mean that in the best way possible, because
it's just normal. It's just normal chat, isn't it? It's just normal.
That too, and I also think I'm incredibly funny, so like maybe I should be a comedian.
That's again, that's not for me to judge, but but yeah, it's important. There's a, like I said, there's a practical element. They do different. They serve different purposes. I can't speak. I probably could, but it will take ages to speak to millions of people. However, if I can get it in a TV show, or if I can get it in a film, you can articulate a narrative and you can articulate a story to a lot more people, a lot quicker. So I think that's why I'm traveling down the road I want to travel down. Because film and TV opens up a window into so many different people that you just physically can't do in the room.
Yeah. So let's talk about the film and TV industry. And you said that obviously you started in 2020, which meant that access needs were completely different to what they are now. Well, they have developed, but you know, we're kind of coming back into that face-to-face vibe. What has it been like for you working in that environment where it's cameras and lights and attention on you, and what is that experience like?
Normally quite warm, because I'm quite warm. I'm quite a warm person, just on a practical level, before we start talking about deeper things. Just on a practical level, I'm quite warm. I've got my ring light on today, which I think you can probably see in my glasses. But it's just you just get used to basically just sweating your entire life, basically.
Yeah.
My first job was in London, and my costume was a big thick black jumper, and it was 35 degrees, and we were in this tiny room, and I remember thinking to myself, because it was my first job, so I was learning, but I was like, I will make sure from now on that I consult the costume department before we start shooting. If I'm shooting in the summer, I will not be picking a big thick black jumper. So that is my practical takeaway: is make sure you wear the right clothing for the season you're working in.
Yeah.
But in terms, what was it? Did that answer the question? Or
I'm just wondering, what's the experience like working with like cameras and like how it, for someone who does not work in TV, I have no idea how it works. So in my head, I think it's like super fast paced and loads of cameras all the time and people always shouting and loads of coffee being drunk. And I think that's purely because I'm thinking about movies that I've seen where that's behind the scenes. And I was wondering, A, is that what it's really like? And B, in terms of access, what's it been like for you accessing that space?
So there's lots we could talk about in that question. It's kind of all of the above plus more. Yeah. It can be all of those things. It can be really fast paced, but it can be, as the actor, a lot of it is waiting around, because you have one angle, they shoot that, so you have to change all the background, you have to change all the lighting, get all the people in position, all the directors move around them so they're not in shot. And then you do your bit, and then they shout cut, and then the actor, you're kind of redundant, so they ship you off into the green room, because you just get in the way otherwise, and then they kind of move all this stuff around. So a lot of it is them waiting around. which I think people don't realise. It's like a lot of it is, yeah, make sure you bring a book to set because there's a lot of kind of you do your bit and then you're done for a bit
Yeah.
and then so you have to be on it because when somebody spent 45 minutes setting up a camera and then you come on as the actor as you've been sat there doing nothing for 45 minutes, if you don't know your lines, funnily enough, everyone's quite annoyed at you because obviously
Yeah.
you've literally been sat there doing nothing while they've all been lifting and pulling and thinking about the shot and doing all the hard work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think being on it and kind of mentally, uh, whatever that looks like for you, because everyone has a different process. My process is different from a different actor's process, but I guess just being vigilant mentally and kind of not a nightmare to work with because it's really annoying. If you don't know your lines, you have one job and know your lines.
Yeah. So talk to me about the access of sets and like just being in that space, because I think because it's so wildly out there compared to like what I do. What is that experience like? Is the access needs, is it difficult? Do you have to ask for things in advance? Is it even thought about, or have you almost had to educate people on the job as well?
So, access, access, access requirements. We're as an industry, we
Mm-hmm.
are just starting that process of
Yeah.
openly talking about access needs. My friend has set up an amazing company called Bridge 06. I would
Mm-hmm.
recommend anyone to check it out, Sarah Johnson. Um, and she is spearheading the drive for things called, or people called access coordinators.
Yeah.
And every set should have an access coordinator from day, well, not even day one, before day one, day zero
Zero.
in pre production all the way through to promotion, there should be an access coordinator. You may have heard about riders. There's lots of people in the entertainment world have riders, and
Mm-hmm.
some people have all kind of glamorous things like I want M&Ms that are just orange or whatever. But an access rider is basically a document with all my access needs that when I get asked to do a job, my agent sends them my access rider,
Uh-huh.
which is basically a 7-page document of everything I'm going to need to do my job properly. And
Mm-hmm.
it makes my life so much easier because you don't have to answer the same questions over and over again. Like,
Yeah.
how wide is your wheelchair? How tall is your wheelchair? What
Mm-hmm.
you just send it off and go, just read that. And then that makes my life a lot easier. So I would recommend anyone with any sort of access need, just write that, and then when you get the same questions, just send it. Just go
Yeah.
read this.
I think everyone should have that. I don't care what industry you're in. Oh my gosh, can
I
you
know,
imagine what it would be like sending that in with your CV? FYI, these are my access needs. Boom.
exactly. It's just honestly, it's made my life so much easier. It's just there's all sorts of templates online. You can make it you very much personalised. It also gives you the power. It
Yeah.
gives it gives you the control over what is written. It's not you're not answering questions that they set. They
Mm-hmm.
don't
Yeah.
get to predetermine the questions because that's the other thing with when it's just question driven, you're only answering what they ask.
Yeah.
So this where you go, there you go. That's 100% me. And you have control over the whole document, not just what they want to know. And so it just empowers you as the individual to take control over your access needs.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Oh, love that so much. So, talk to me about some of the exciting projects that you have been a part of and potentially what could be coming out.
We'll start at the start. I was in a short called We're Too Good for This,
Uh-huh.
which was directed by Missy Malik. and I think you've seen that, haven't you?
I loved it. I watched it at least 3 or 4 times. I think my favorite thing about the whole short was that disability was kind of played upon in a really fun way, but it really got quite a strong point across, like when she loses her hearing aid, or like when you happen to be having an epileptic fit. There were lots of like little pieces where I was like, as a disabled person, I could completely understand what you were doing, and I found it very, very funny. Whereas I'm not actually spoken to someone who's non-disabled about it, but I can imagine they'd be like, what? But as a disabled person, I was like, no, like that's absolutely something that you would do in that situation. I loved it.
Yeah, I think that short illustrates the importance of having disabled people not just in front of the camera,
Yes.
but also behind the camera in the production team.
Yeah.
And the kind of executive producer team and kind of disabled people at the top. Now I'm going to get a phrase in that I get into every interview. Uh, Diversity without disability is not diversity.
Yeah, completely.
I
Absolutely
think
agree.
within our industry, there's a lot of talk of diversity, and it drives me up the wall when these people win these awards, often for playing disabled people, and then they talk about diversity and they list off all the characteristics that I 100% believe need to be included, and yet they forget the biggest one. They forget disability. Honestly, it's it's amazing how many people still do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's what that film I think addresses really well.
Yeah.
It doesn't just show one disabled character; it shows four, and it
Yeah.
shows that there's diversity within disability as well. Because that's another contention I have is disabled people aren't just one kind of
Disability
blob.
is not a monolith. It's very much an umbrella term for a whole multitude of different things.
Exactly. So that's I hope and I think the success of that film because it did really well. Um, shows that also there's an audience appetite for
Yes.
for disabled stories. And yeah, I can't say unfortunately what's going to happen with that, but there's exciting things on the way.
Yeah. Or it's so fun, like having this inside knowledge of what's potentially going to happen. I
I
feel like
know
so powerful.
it is exciting for me particularly because I'm a bit of a disability representation nerd, so it's like
Yeah.
it's nice knowing that there's exciting things coming. And then I did a few adverts and adverts. We can talk about adverts that I think the kind of mantra of diversity without disability is not diversity applies
Yeah.
to adverts as well. And they don't have to be about disability. They can just be because they adverts always talk about like getting when it used to be cast off the street, so they get the average person, whatever that actually means.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so we need diversity and disabled people included in the advert. And then I did a show called Sex Education. Don't know if anyone
Just quite a small show, not
I don't know if anyone's heard of, but yeah, I'm in a series four of that, so that was a surreal experience. I'm only
yeah.
a very small part. I'm not gonna bring myself up too much, but I'm also not gonna deny the fact that I was one of my favourite shows that's changed the game in terms of disability representation.
Yeah, absolutely. And for such a small show, it's made a massive impact, and I think that's one thing that I particularly love about that show anyway, is that its representation is just, it's phenomenal, to be quite honest. It's almost got everything. And I love that, but
But it's
also
almost got everything, but you have not seen series 4 yet, and I think I don't think you can do everything, but
no.
my God, they do a good effort at making sure that it's not just you're not just ticking a box. I can't wait for you guys to see what series 4 has in store, because it's probably people watching this have already seen it, but the diversity is not just a tick box exercise. The
Yeah.
diversity is taken very, very seriously, and yeah, it's I think there's no other show, no other
Yeah.
show.
No, and I you're someone who's worked on that show, and I'm someone who avidly watches that show. And I think you're bang on. There's no other show that actually meets it in terms of how it represents diversity. And I I'm so looking forward to watching series 4, but also I'm so looking forward to being like, I know him. Interviewed him for my podcast.
Yeah,
Like, nobody.
well, like I said, I'm fully aware that I'm not a big part, so I don't want. I don't, but I do get scenes with all the kind of people that you would recognise, and
Yeah.
everyone was very lovely, so that was nice.
Do you know what? I love that because I think it's so good when people are like, no, they're genuinely really lovely people. They're not assholes.
Yeah, it's funny. Obviously, I met GT, and I was like, "Oh, hi, how are you?" And like, "Hi, how are you?" And then we just got on really well. We just talked for like days solidly, and
Yeah.
it was so surreal because it's just everyone's just normal, and I think that's one thing I wish people would reevaluate about the way they view people in the entertainment industry. Is everyone's just human. Like, just
Yeah.
speak to people like normal people, and you're going to get so much better response.
So you've been in sex education. You've got your foot in the door in the acting world.
Yes.
Couple of scenes in sex education. You've
Yeah.
met some cool people. What else is potentially in store?
Potentially. Luckily I know what's coming. Um, so I'm in a show called Kirkmore.
Uh-huh.
You've seen the In-Betweeners.
Yes.
So it's the same people who made the In-Betweeners,
Yeah.
made Kirkmore, which I don't know when it's coming out, but hopefully by the time that you're watching this, it'll be out by now. And if it is, go and check it out on iPlayer. Um, it's made for the BBC, which again is really exciting. Kind of
Yeah.
disability representation on the mainstream kind of uh,
Platform.
platform. I play one of the leads. We have 3 disabled leads, which
Lovely.
please find me another show that has that on this scale. I haven't found one,
Yeah.
which is really exciting. And it follows a day in the life of their school day, basically. And naturally, because it's a comedy, um,
It's fun.
hilarity, hilarity ensues.
Yeah.
And that is it's so well made because it's you really start to it starts to disentangle the kind of archetypes of disabled people. There's is kind of the baddie is ableism as well, and I think that's very clever. It's there isn't really a bad character. There's just ableist, and it's I mean it was slightly surreal actually to see so many disabled people in positions of power, because
Yeah.
our director is part of the disabled community. Our writer is disabled, so
Mm-hmm.
like it's just amazing. There's no, like I said, no other show like it. I don't think, and I'm excited for people to actually be able to watch it and hopefully not just laugh at it because it is very funny. Um, even if I do say so myself, it's alright. But yeah, it's I can't wait for people to see it because it's very special, very special.
Yeah.
So if you excuse the pun.
I cannot wait to watch it. I really, really can't, because I think what you said about there being 3 disabled leads and then writers being disabled, producers being disabled, there is something very, very special about disabled people writing and producing and acting in a way that's super authentic to the disabled experience. And what you said about ableism being like the bad guy, and there isn't like necessarily one character that is the encapsulation of it. It's just things that happen. I think that type of storytelling, particularly around disability, makes people second think what they're doing, what they're saying, and that goes back to what you said earlier about how you want to change this narrative, and it's very persuasive when you're able to do it through that lens. And I'm super looking forward to it. I'm so looking forward to it.
The characters are just characters who happen to be disabled.
Yeah.
And I think we can talk about whether or not it should be characters, like whether you should be a disabled character or whether you should be just a character, or kind of the nuances of what those kind of different connotations are, and whether I'm a disabled actor or whether I'm an actor, or does that make a difference? Which I'm not sure where I am on that. I think I'm just a disabled actor. That's what I would say. I wouldn't kind of I don't say like I'm an actor with a disability, because I much prefer identity first language rather than person first language. But I appreciate that every disabled person or person with a disability, depending on what they prefer, has a choice on whatever they prefer.
Yeah, on how they identify.
Yeah, I don't say with a disability, because where is it? I can't pick it up. I can't. It's not. It's like it's not on me. It's not like a bag I can pick up with. It just is me. Like me, I can't separate my disability from my identity. So that's why I'm a disabled actor rather than an actor with a disability.
Yeah. And I think that as well in and of itself is a really important point, is that everybody has the right to identify however they want. But what you said about how you can't pick your disability up like it's a bag, and you can't put it down like it's a bag, like, and it's true, because I can't suddenly decide one day to put my disability down. I also one day can't decide to suddenly pick my disability up. It's with me 24/7, and it's something that's always going to be there, and it's magically never going to go away, and like it's never magically going to disappear. So that really resonates with me.
Yeah, you shouldn't be made to feel that your life would be inherently better without your disability.
Yes, exactly that point, that life is not, disability is inherently not good or bad. It just is. It's just part of the human experience, and we need to kind of move away from this whole idea of disability being good or bad. But we've already covered that. Like, we're doing like full circles here. Oh my gosh! Like, I've only got one more question for you, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to it, because I just get the right vibe. But I'm gonna ask you anyway, and that is, Keron, are you disabled and proud?
I'm very disabled. I'm very proud to be disabled.
I just want to say thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast, because I cannot wait to see what you do, because I think you're going to take this TV and media world by storm, and I'm so excited to watch your journey, because I think everything that you've said has been absolutely key, and the way that you've spoken about changing narratives and being part of that change is just, it's actually really soul warming, because it's so needed. And yeah, I'm so excited to see you on TV. I'm so excited.
Thank you. Hopefully, the tides are turning, and the new wave of inclusivity that has disabled people at the front and centre is coming. We've just got to work and work and work and work and work, and that's unfortunately, as it is for many industries, what disabled people just have to do. We just have to work a hell of a lot harder to get to the same place, but we will get there. We will.
Thank you so much for being a guest. I've loved this, and I genuinely can't wait to see what you do.
Thank you.